The greatest commandment in the Bible is to love God with all your heart. The second greatest commandment is to love one another. After that, it's a bit of a free-for-all, but I'd probably give third place to the fifth of the 10 commandments: do not murder. 6 months ago, our pastor, Zach, broke the fifth commandment. We love God with the fullness of our hearts. We cared for the sick, the poor, the needy. We ran soup kitchens out of the back of our church, put on daycares for single moms, read to the elderly. But because Zach broke the fifth commandment, it was as if our church had been cursed. Sometimes when I was in church on my own, it felt as if God had abandoned the building, and something dark and hungry had taken his place. 6 months ago, after a Sunday evening service, Zach was locking up the church. He was on his own, had stayed late to finish preparing a midweek Bible study. Fiddling with the key in the lock, he'd felt someone tap him on the shoulder. He'd turned around, expecting to see someone from our congregation, perhaps Martha, who had a terrible habit of leaving her Bible under her seat. Instead, he saw a man he'd never met before. So close Zach could feel his stinking breath on his forehead. Tall but wiry, in clothes that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. Looked like he was in his 60s. Teeth all janky, foaming at the mouth. Wild eyes like the eyes of a rabid animal, but focused, unblinking. Fixed on him. And before Zach even knew what was happening, the man had handed him a knife. Zach says that the blade was already covered in blood, although no one ever figured out where the blood came from. Zach later told us that he took a step back towards the church, pressed himself against the door, the knife in his hands. He said that there was no way he could have stopped what happened. Couldn't have stopped the man from stepping forwards and stepping forwards again and again and again, until Zach's hand was pressed against the man's stomach and the man's lips were stained red. Zach was a good person. He did all he could for the man, but the man bled out on the church's welcome mat. Zach said that after he called for an ambulance, he prayed for him. While he prayed, the man never broke eye contact. Zach told us that he believed the man actually smiled, grinned before he died. We found out the next morning. The next few months were some of the worst our church ever faced. Zach was arrested, questioned by the police. I even had to lead the midweek Bible study and preach my first sermon. The church's CCTV saved Zach, proved that there really wasn't much that Zach could have done. I told him exactly that when I sat with him one night, smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey on his porch. I can remember how badly his hands were shaking, how pale his face was. "You're a good man, Zach," I told him. We talked about the act of killing in the Bible, the righteous war of the Israelites as they invaded Canaan, the slaughtering of the residents of Jericho, or die destruction. But something about Zach's actions didn't feel righteous. Deep down, I knew he'd done something terrible that night. He'd broken the fifth commandment. "You're a good man," I told him, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just smoked and drank until the sun began to rise. The size of our congregation shrank drastically. We'd originally had around 130 weekly attendees, but within the course of a month, it had gone down to about 60. Mostly older people, although a few families stayed. It took about that long for the Holy Spirit to leave that place, for the darkness to set in. It was a Tuesday night during our kids group. Only 3 kids were there that week, and it was just me and my wife running the night. We told them the story of Daniel in the den of lions, made them popcorn, and put on a film. Turned the lights off, but one of the kids wasn't interested. Ola, 6 years old, tiny little thing, always quiet. During the film, she got out of her chair, wandered off. I followed her, retreating from the brightness of the projector screen as she walked towards the back left corner of the room. She stopped about 5 feet away from it. Pitch black, could barely see anything at all, but Ola lifted up her hand as if she was reaching out for something. "You're missing the movie," I said, but Ola didn't respond. Kept her hand held up, her palm now pointing at the ceiling. "Ola," I said, and she turned her head to look at me. "I'm talking," she told me, and then she turned to face the darkness again. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, but I swear that this corner was darker than anywhere else in the room. Blackout blinds dark. and cold. Like really, ridiculously cold. "Who are you talking to?" I asked her. She didn't answer, wasn't even paying attention to me, but she stumbled back a few steps. "I don't want to do that," she said. And then she dropped her hand to her side. Suddenly, I didn't feel so cold, and the corner didn't look quite as dark. Ola span on her heels, ran back to her chair at the front of the church, scooped up a handful of popcorn from her bowl, as if nothing had happened. I talked to my wife about it on the way back from church. She thought it was nothing. Spoke to Zach about it the next day. He took me a bit too seriously, even put out his cigarette. "Pray," he told me. "When the whole world seems dark, that's when you should pray." Stamped out his cigarette with the heel of his boot. Weeks passed, nothing too strange to report, except for a feeling. A feeling that things weren't quite right. A feeling that I shouldn't be in the church on my own after dark. A feeling like something lurked behind every door. And a few odd stories. Things like, the projector turned itself off in the middle of the service, so we had to resort to getting out a stack of olden books. We turned up for our midweek Bible study to find a dead mouse next to the pulpit. Put out mouse traps all over the place, but never found any more. Ola told her parents that she'd seen a black goat roaming around the fields behind the church, with chains wrapped around its horns. Martha left her Bible underneath her chair one night, but when she came to pick it up on the Monday morning, she found that it had been left in front of the entrance. These are the kind of stories you might tell around a campfire to freak out a few kids, but we didn't take it too seriously. We had too much on our plates already. Zach's drinking habit was getting out of hand, and his sermons were becoming increasingly incomprehensible. Our church was dwindling in size. Teenagers were filming TikToks in front of the building, calling it the murder church. It's not as if we were moving on from what had happened. It was impossible to move on. But we really did believe that God would one day come back to this building, would make it his home again. I first realized that he was well and truly gone 2 months ago. Tuesday night, kids group. Me, my wife, Ola, and 2 other girls. No one else in the church. Zach was letting us use his office, which was upstairs in the church, next to the sports hall. We were leading a Bible study on David and Goliath, and my wife and I were far more interested than the girls were. About 30 minutes into the study, Ola told my wife that she needed to go to the toilet. My wife offered to escort her. Ola turned her down, and then my wife insisted. So off they went together, leaving me and the 2 girls alone. Zach's office is a small room, lined with tall bookcases, thousands of old Bible commentaries. A big desk next to the window, embroidered with coffee rings. A giant lamp as the main source of light. Some beanbags for any casual meetings. Those are what we were sat on that night. And a thick, heavy door, the kind of door you'd have to shove to open. Beyond the door, the staircase. The girls and I were waiting for my wife and Ola to return when we heard the footsteps. Right at the bottom of the stairs, a dense thud, as if someone had put all of their weight into their foot. There was a long moment of silence, just long enough that I thought I'd imagined it. Then, thud, thud, thud. Faster now, but just as firm, just as heavy, working their way up the stairs. There are 14 stairs that lead to Zach's office and the sports hall. Whoever was coming up these stairs in that moment was making short work of them. The girls pulled each other close. I could see how terrified they were. To be honest, even though I thought it was probably just my wife playing a prank on me, I was pretty freaked out too. And those footsteps were getting closer. Thud, thud, thud. Only, as they were getting closer, it was as if they were becoming quieter, lighter, softer, as if whatever was making its way up the stairs had paws or hooves. And there was a new sound, something I could just about make out. The rattling of chains. The footsteps continued once whoever, or whatever, this was had reached the top of the stairs. They stopped right outside the door. Then there was silence. "Who's there?" I called out. "Ruth, is that you?" No answer. "Ruth." The door handle turned, kept turning, twisted unnaturally far, and then the door slowly swung open. This was a heavy door, remember, but the door opened smoothly without resistance. On the other side, all I could see was darkness. Then I heard the scream, a heart-wrenching, terrified scream, somewhere deep within the church. My wife, Ruth. Instinct kicked in. Suddenly, I didn't give a crap about whatever was lurking in the darkness. I knew that my wife was in danger, and I needed to get to her. So I told the girls to stay in Zach's office, took a deep breath, and then flung myself out of the room. No one was in the hallway, although I felt as if I was being watched from all sides. But I didn't have time to dwell on that. I threw myself down the stairs, ran towards the restrooms. Found my wife stood outside the ladies, bawling her eyes out, her skin prickled with goosebumps. I couldn't get a word out of her, except for that she didn't know where Ola was. I knew exactly where she'd be. I found her stood near the back corner of the church main hall, the corner a black abyss leaking out into the room. Ola was silent, her hand stretched out into the shadows. "I don't want to," she said again. And then, out of the shadows, a hand reached out and touched hers. A big hand, a man's hand. I just about stopped myself from screaming, and I was glad that I did, because a moment later, the man in the corner stepped out of the darkness and revealed himself. Zach, clearly drunk, with an unlit cigarette hanging out of his mouth. "You should get back to your Bible study," he told Ola, slurring his words. Ola didn't go back to her study. I called her parents, called the other girls' parents, too. I also called the rest of the church's elders, and I recommended that Zach should be encouraged to take a sabbatical. I even drove him to the airport that weekend. We didn't say a word to one another, but Zach didn't look well. He hadn't shaved in a while, and he definitely hadn't washed. After he took his suitcase out of the bunk of my car, I prayed for him and sent him on his way. It took until that night for my wife to tell me what had happened to her in the restroom. She didn't tell me much. She was far too embarrassed to elaborate. But what she did say is that when she left her toilet stall, she saw something stood in the doorway. A black goat, about as big as a wolf, with chains wrapped around its horns, staring right at her. We stopped going to church after that. I hadn't given up on God, certainly hadn't turned away from my faith, but I definitely distanced myself from my church. I wanted nothing to do with it, didn't want to talk about it. I even ignored Zach's texts, the few attempts at calls that he made. I'm ashamed to say that I blocked his number. When I heard from an elder last week that Zach hadn't returned from his sabbatical, I didn't think much of it. I had too much going on in my own life. Ruth and I both weren't sleeping well, and we were arguing more. She clearly couldn't stop thinking about that night, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. To be honest, we've been working hard to put this chapter of our lives behind us. But that changed 2 nights ago. I received a phone call from Ola's mom. Almost didn't pick up, and I kind of wish that I hadn't. She had a story to tell me, through tears and panic and stress. Because 2 nights ago, Ola had been at the kids' group, and one of the elders had found her stood in that dark corner of the church, facing the shadows, with her hand stretched out. "I don't want to," she'd said. Then a man's hand had reached out to touch hers. Only this hand had been holding a knife already slick with blood, a knife that settled in Ola's open palm. Apparently, Ola stood dead still as the man walked out of the shadows, a tall and wiry man with dirty clothes and a stinking breath, a man who walked straight into the blade, without hesitation. Apparently, Zach died with a big grin on his face and with eyes as wild as an animal's. I hung up the phone, blocked Ola's number, didn't tell my wife. Last night, I woke up to find Zach sat at the end of my bed. His face was thick with sweat, his eyes blazing with fury, and there was a lit cigarette hanging out of his mouth. In the doorway, I saw a black goat, almost as large as a man, with chains wrapped around its horns. In Zach's right hand, I saw that he gripped a knife, held out towards me. "I don't want it," I thought, and he smiled in response. And then he was gone, as if he'd never been there. My room was empty, and Ruth was still fast asleep. But I've written this story down because I want someone to know that if I ever break the 5th commandment, it won't be out of choice. I've also written this down because I want someone to pray for me. The whole world seems dark, and I need prayer. It didn't work for Zach, but maybe it will work for me. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there, burning the edges of the night with my eyes wide open, counting the pulse in my neck like a cheap metronome. The house hummed, radiator ticking, fridge groaning, the sort of noises you only hear when you're waiting for something worse. Around 4 in the morning, I got up, padded barefoot into the kitchen, and made coffee I didn't want. The mug warmed my hands. The window was only a black square with a smear of my reflection and a hint of the garden beyond, silvered by streetlight. I kept glancing at the doorway, braced for hoofs, for the drag rattle of chain. Ruth came in around 6, bleary, hair swept to one side like she'd been pulled that way by a dream. "You okay?" she asked. That sentence lands like a glass set down too hard when you're brittle. I lied with a nod. She poured cereal, didn't eat, and then told me we should go to work like normal. Our marriage had become a series of little treaties like that. Don't say goat, don't say Zach, don't mention the kids' hall. Pay council tax. Keep breathing. Driving to work, I passed the church. Couldn't help it. It's on the main road, hunkered between the charity shop and the bus stop glass that's always cracked. Someone had spray painted a halo over the sign the week before, then crossed it out with devil horns. I slowed and looked longer than I should have. The front steps were clean. Too clean. The welcome mat was gone, finally binned after the blood wouldn't come out, even from the rubber backing. There was a new mat, stiff, straw bright. The first thing I thought was, that won't help. I didn't talk to anyone about the vision. I didn't pray. I just ran hot water in the shower and tried to steam it out of me like a sickness. 2 days. I lasted 2 days pretending nothing had changed. Then the house began to pick up habits the church had shed. Doors that always stuck started to swing easy, then swing wide like something had greased the hinges from the other side. The hallway's cold patch, with a floorboard dips, went from a smudge of chill to a bruise I had to pass through. I started leaving every light on and pretending it was for the dog we don't have. Ruth didn't argue. She began sleeping with a hoodie on, hood up, one hand knotted in the drawstrings. By Friday, it wasn't just the house. It was me. I caught myself doing it in the break room at work, left hand stretched out, palm up, like I was waiting to be given something. The kettle clicked and hissed. I saw the reflection of my own hand in the microwave door and yanked it back like I'd touched a socket. I stuffed my fist in my pocket so hard the knuckles ached. I wasn't praying. I wasn't offering. I was ready. That's what scared me. Readiness. Like I'd learned a shape, and now my body kept folding into it. I walked out into the car park and called the only elder who still answered when I rang. Harold, 80 if he's a day, hearing Aid whistling, breath like peppermint oil, and old hymns. He picked up on the third ring, voice full of cotton. "Son, Harold," I said, and then for a second I didn't know what to say, because the real sentence was I saw our dead pastor on my bed, and he tried to give me a knife for whatever pit he's fallen into. What I said was, "Do you still have keys?" He didn't ask why. He just said, "Of course," like he was talking about his own front door. We met that night, after dark, because that's the kind of stupid you can only do at night. I didn't tell Ruth. I left a note that said, "Visiting Harold," and I hated myself for making it sound like I was paying a hospital visit to a man who deserved. What? Prayer? A rescue rope? An apology for my silence? Harold waited in his car under the sodium lamp, face lit orange, Bible on his lap. When I opened his passenger door, the book slid and thumped onto the mat. His hand shook when he bent to pick it up. "You heard about Zach," he murmured. Not a question. Facts lie down in a flat voice like that. "The police are calling it a suicide. I don't know what to call it. The coroner will write a word. Words aren't bandages." We didn't talk more in the car. We didn't pray. Harold passed me a ring of keys heavy enough to be a weapon. Steel teeth and brass scars. I held the ring by the church door, and the whole building felt awake. Like I'd pressed my ear to some old animal's throat and heard the lungs. I almost laughed. Laughed at myself for getting spooked by a building I'd painted and vacuumed and slept in during youth lock-ins. Then I slid the key in, turned it, and the cold came up through my shoes and bit my ankles. We didn't switch on the big lights. We used the lamps from the lobby, The ones with dusty beige shades that make everything look like a photograph from the 70s. The place smelled like wicker and stale pastry. And something else, tang of vinegar under the carpet cleaner. That's what blood smells like when you've scrubbed it 3 times and given up. I stood on the new mat and waited to feel anything. Remorse, faith, a thought that wasn't just get out, and all I got was the gentle itch of the coconut fibers through my socks. "Let's see it," Harold said. "What?" "The corner," he said. "The dark one." He didn't want to call it anything truer. I didn't either. We walked down the aisle past a stack of plastic chairs. Someone had left 3 little paper cups on a radiator, each with a burnt-out tea light puckered at the center. We moved past the lectern, past the party-colored books, the Bibles with cracked spines, and the hymnals that still had penciled-in alto lines from whoever sang too high. The nearer we came to that back left corner, the more the noise of the street flattened. Even Harold's shoes quieted, and he never lifts his feet. The air had a weight to it like wet felt. I knew I should stop. Call Ruth. Call the police. Call anybody with a badge and a report form so that whatever happened next could be written down and stamped. Instead, I took one step more and saw it. Not darkness like the absence of light, but a crowded darkness like something standing in front of you with its mouth closed, breathing through its nose. That's when I smelled it. Not rot, not sulfur, not even goat. It smelled like struck matches and war metal. The smell from the porch that night, sun not quite up, Zach's ashtray full, and both of us pretending endings could be averted if we talked long enough. Harold lifted his hand. Weak, old, but stubborn. He whispered something. I'll be honest, it wasn't scripture I recognized. It sounded older. He stopped halfway through the second line, like he'd forgotten the words, or like the words had been pulled from his throat. I heard the smallest sound then, a click like a ring dropped on tile. "Che, my head supplied. Don't turn. Don't let it know you know." Harold said, "I think we should leave," and I loved him for it. Loved him for not making me be the one who chickened out. I turned with him, and in that slow swivel of my body, I felt the itch in my left palm again. A weightless readiness, the shape of the waiting. I shoved my hand into the pocket of my jacket, so hard the seam popped. We got back to the lobby, and I put the keys on the receptionist's desk like a man putting down a gun. "Harold," I said, "if there's anything you haven't told me, now would be good." His hearing aid whined. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Zach asked me to burn the mat," he said, "weeks before the end. He said he kept dreaming he was sleeping outside the door, his mouth full of straw. I told him a mat can't hold a curse." Harold looked at the new one and his face went gray. Maybe he can hold a shape. He took the keys. We stepped outside, and this is important, the world felt normal again. Immediately, traffic noise returned like someone unmuted it. The thin rain felt like nothing more than thin rain. We stood under the overhang, and Harold patted my shoulder like a man releasing a pigeon and hoping it doesn't come back. "You'll stay away," he said. "Yeah," I said, and meant it, the way a drunk means it with a fresh pint sweating on the table. I didn't go back to the church. The church came back with me. That night, I placed a chair under the bedroom handle. I know that's stupid. If something wanted to come in, a cheap IKEA chair wasn't going to stop it. But I wanted friction. I wanted to hear the scoot and scrape and be awake before whatever came next. Ruth stood in the door frame, arms crossed tight, hoodie strings hooked over her thumbs. She didn't ask what I was doing, which told me she was doing the same math in her head. We lay there and pretended to watch a quiz show on my phone, volume low, so the house wouldn't hear it and know where to find us. Every time the presenter asked a question about famous quotes, the same line beat under it, "Do not murder." Like the commandment had migrated from scripture to the inside of my skull and set up as an alarm. It wasn't a warning anymore. It felt like the label under a painting, Untitled Murder. Oil on canvas, on loan from a private collection. At 2, the chair shifted. It was a small thing. The hinge breathed. The chair leg kissed wood. The sound snuck under the quilt. I didn't move. Ruth's fingers tightened. The room was so cold that I could hear the radiator ticking without heat, settling like bones. I waited for hooves, for chain, For a match strike and a long drag. Nothing. 10 minutes of nothing, so complete it felt staged. Then a voice outside the door, calm and conversational and wrong, said, "I'll come back when you're ready." It wasn't Zach's voice. It wasn't a voice I knew. That's what made me want to be sick. It sounded like the voice of a phone tree when you call your broadband supplier. A voice built to be helpful. That tone, applied to a promise like that, is worse than a snarl. The chair didn't move again. The house exhaled. Ruth and I did not sleep. We didn't talk about it in the morning. That's a lie. We did talk, but not like you think. We fought about toast. About the bin bag I'd left tied, but not taken out. About the recycling rules. Those fights aren't really about the bin bag. They're about control. Can you do the small things? Can you do anything? Around noon, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I should have let it ring out. Instead, I put on speaker because my hands were covered in dish soap and terror. "Hello. Is this the man who runs Tuesday Kids Group?" A woman. Young. Thick city accent. She sounded like she'd been crying in a car park. "Sometimes," I said, dumb answer. "Who is this?" "This is Ida," she said. "Ola's mom." That's when my stomach fell through me. "She's been asking for you," Ida said. "She talks into the corners sometimes." I took her to the GP and he gave me a leaflet. You know the kind. Her breath hitched. She said if you come to the house, he'll stop asking her. I don't know who he is. I don't want to, but I can't sleep. Please. I looked at Ruth. She was already shaking her head. I couldn't blame her. "Text me your address," I told Ida. I'm not a hero. I'm not even a good man. I just needed a line to the thing that had selected my life for whatever this was. If it was talking to Ola, maybe I could, I don't know, swap places, offer to carry it. Bad plan. But when everything softer than that plan has failed, you take the bad one. Ida lived in a terrace that had been neat once and then had a child. Stickers on the banister. A crack in the glass of the photo of a man I guessed was the dad, in a blue suit, smiling like he'd got away with something. Ida opened the door and the smell of laundry powder punched me. Clean, clean, clean. A mother's prayer made aerosol. Ola stood behind her in socks with rabbits on them. Her hair in two fraying plaits, eyes serious in that way some kids' eyes are, like they've already decided the adults are making a mess of it. "Hi," I said to her. "Hi," she said back, and then lifted her left hand and held it out, palm up. Ida made a sound like she'd been struck. "Don't," she whispered, more to the air than to her daughter. She looked at me, begging. "Don't say his name." "What name?" Ola answered. "The one he forgot," she said. "The one that eats the light." I swallowed. "Can we sit in the lounge?" I asked because I needed to do something normal like sit on a sofa and comment on cushions. We went in. The TV was paused on a cartoon Fox mid-blink. I sat on the edge of an armchair like I was nervous about leaving a crease. "Ola," I said, keeping my voice light. "I'm worried about the church." "Is that a silly worry?" "No," she said. "He said it's hollow now, like a reed." "Who said?" She blinked. One plate started to come undone. Ida leaned forward to retie it, and Ola flinched without meaning to. "Don't pull," she muttered. Ida's hands trembled. She finished the knot badly. Ola answered me, as if I'd asked what color the sky was. "Zach," she said. "He said he's sorry. He says sorry every time he laughs." The room went colder. Ida's hand found my sleeve. "You see him?" I asked. "He stands wrong," she said, and her face made a shape I've only seen on old women at funerals. A knowledge face. "He stands like the corners stand." I heard the clink of something and for a second thought it was chain. It was just the central heating knocking. "What does he want?" She looked at me like I was being slow. "To share," she said. "He has too much." "Too much what?" Ola lifted her palm, then closed it into a fist like she was holding water and didn't want to spill any. "Him," she said. "The one that eats the light." My mouth was dry enough that my lips stuck when I tried to speak. "And he, this other, wants you to do what?" Ola's eyes slid toward the doorway to the hall. "Practice," she said, "so I don't drop anything when it's heavy." Then she smiled, and because she is 6, the smile was not evil. It was pleased. He says I'm very careful, she said. He says I'm better than Zach. Ida made a noise that was half sob and half curse. Get out, she said to me. Then, softer, broken, please. I don't know what this is, but it started with you lot and it ends with you lot. I stood. My spine hurt. Okay, I said. Okay. I bent because I wanted to say something to Ola at eye level, some film line about bravery. But when I got down there, I heard the hum in the walls, a hum I'd pretended to ignore at the church. It wasn't the fridge. It wasn't the boiler. It sounded like a word being held so long it had stopped meaning anything. I backed up, and Ola grinned like we were telling a secret together. Outside, on the small front step, I finally prayed. Not words. I didn't have words. I just pushed the shape of my fear toward the sky and hoped it would be interpreted correctly. It didn't make me feel better. It made me feel seen, and that was worse. That night, I did what men do when they don't know how to fix something. I tried to fix something else. I rearranged the shed. I sharpened knives I don't cook with. I replaced the smoke alarm battery. When I stood on the chair to reach it, I had the stupid thought that if I fell and cracked my head, the whole thing might end there. No knife. The thought tasted like relief for a fraction of a second, and that frightened me more than anything. I climbed down carefully. I don't want to die. I don't want to kill. I want to wake up and find the mat is only a mat. The corner is only a corner. Near midnight, Ruth came into the kitchen and leaned against the doorway. We can go away, she said. Get an Airbnb near the coast. Leave our phones. Just sit in wind and eat chips. Please. We can, I said. Then we stood there looking at each other knowing we wouldn't. You can bolt the door, but if the thing has learned the shape of your door in the dark, it doesn't matter what county you're in. I should have told her about Ida. I should have told her what Ola said. Instead, I said, do you remember that Sunday when the little boy kept pressing the keyboard demo button during them? Ruth smiled tired. He got us all to sing How Great Thou Art with a bossa nova beat, she said. I thought Harold would pass out. We laughed quietly. Then we both watched our laughs with suspicion, like maybe they'd wander away and come back with something attached. We went to bed. The chair went under the handle again. The hoodie strings were knotted tight. I fell asleep the way you fall when you've fought it all day. The dream came quick. I was standing in the church, alone, but I was wrong in it, bigger than the chairs, too tall for the ceiling, so when I breathed my head scraped the paint. I looked down, and I was holding a mat like a shield. On the mat was written, "Do not murder" in block letters, so dense the bristles bent. Footsteps came up the stairs. Not thuds. Soft, many-footed little pats like something scuttling with too many legs. I raised the mat. Zach came around the corner on all fours and smiled up at me with straw in his teeth. My eyes snapped open to the dark. The room stank like a match about to catch. The chair under the door pressed forward, then steadied. I lay frozen and tried to track every sound. A car on the far road. A fox making that awful noise foxes make, Ruth's breath hitching. Then the voice again just outside. Soon, it said cheerfully. Soon you won't have to think. I felt something then I hadn't let myself feel. Not rage, not terror, envy. The idea of not having to think, not having to choose, not having to ask whether your hand is your hand or a handle someone else is turning. There's a part of the brain that hears that and says, please. I rolled onto my side and clung to Ruth like I was falling. Morning came late and gray. I made coffee that tasted like ash. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Text only. A photo. I opened it and almost dropped the mug. It was the church lobby. I recognized the scuffed linoleum and the watercolor of loaves and fishes that had hung crooked for years. The photo had been taken from low, as if a child had held the phone at her waist. On the floor in front of the new mat, someone had laid a Bible spread-eagled like a bird. The page was Psalm 23. A finger pointed at the line about the valley. The nail was rimmed with dirt like a little crescent of shadow. Under the photo, a message. He says it's a good valley. Come see. I typed "who is this" and deleted it, and typed "don't text me again" and deleted that, and typed a prayer and deleted that too, because I didn't want to make prayer a text. I didn't reply. I put the phone on the counter face down and washed it with a dishcloth like I could clean off whatever it had carried in. At 9:10, Harold called. "I'm at the church," he said. "There's been vandalism." His voice shook. "They wrote on the walls. It's chalk. It'll come off. But I don't like it. It's all the same word." He swallowed. "They wrote it 100 times. "What word?" He whispered it the way you whisper when you think you might be overheard by something that can come through keyholes. "Ready," he said. "Then come." I should have said no. I should have told him to call the police, to file a report, to let the insurance sort out the chalk. Instead, I said I'll be there in 10, and then lied to Ruth about an errand. I told myself it was because Harold's old and shouldn't be alone in a situation like that. That was partly true. It was also because the text had said come see, and I am weak. I ran a red light. I parked badly. I walked up the steps, and the new mat bristled under my soles like a cat I'd stepped on. The door was open a crack. I put my fingers against it, and it moved without weight, the way doors do in dreams. "Harold," I called. I didn't hear him. I heard a zip, a whisper of chain dragging just far enough to echo. Then nothing. I went in anyway. The lobby was as in the photo, Bible belly up, fat with a page that stuck to the next. The air tasted like chalk. The vandalism started in the corridor, neat at first, tiny, written low, like a child trying to keep their hand steady. "Ready, ready, ready." It marched along the skirting boards and climbed the walls, letters bigger, looping, rush of handwriting from lots of hands, all sharing the same word, until it was a banner across the notice board, over the posters for the food bank and the nativity from 3 years ago. "Ready, ready, ready." I touched one R and came away dusty. I don't know why I put my finger in my mouth. Habit from paper cuts. The chalk tasted like the air under a bed. "Harold," I called again, louder. My voice didn't bounce. It went down the hall and stayed there. I walked toward the main hall, and everything in me wanted to look left down the corridor toward the toilets, but I didn't, and by forcing my gaze forward, I think I made it obvious where I didn't want to look because a sound came from that left corridor, a small scrape of something being moved across tile. It was followed by a very gentle, patient clink. Chain laid down link by link with care, the way you lay out a necklace that's knotted. "Harold," I said, and my voice broke on the H. "Here," he called. Relief poured through me like heat. "In the hall," he added. "Come see what's been done to the cross." The cross is simple. 2 beams that Mr. Collins in his shed carved after his wife died. Uneven as a farm gate. No one had done anything to it. It was fine. The words were all on the walls, climbing right up to the strip lights. I turned in place, pocketing my hands to keep them from finding their own shape again. "Where are you?" "By the piano," he said. And there he was, sunk into one of the fabric chairs, hair flatter than usual, looking small. He smiled at me with a relief that made me want to weep. "It's gotten worse since I called," he said, like he was apologizing for not tidying before company came over. I walked to him. The carpet accepted my weight like a lake accepts a stone. When I was 2 strides away, Harold flicked his eyes past me, toward the back left corner. I didn't turn my head. I stared at him. "You see it?" I asked. He nodded, and his lips whitened where he pressed them together. "Don't look," he whispered. And for a second, he wasn't Harold. He was every old man who's ever taught me anything important, pressing a rule into me with trembling hands. I didn't look. The corner boiled at the edge of my vision. I kept my gaze on Harold's knuckles. They were paler than paper, 2 dots of old man blood under the skin like berries. His right hand opened. Without thinking, God forgive me, I held out my left. I didn't mean to. It had become a reflex, like scratching a healing cut. Harold's mouth opened, and a noise came out of him I don't ever want to hear again. Shame and hunger and surrender in one long thread. He leaned forward. He was holding something I couldn't see while my eyes were doing that, not looking the way you don't look at the sun. The weight slid into my palm. It was heavier than I remembered from the porch with Zach, balanced wrong, warm with a heat that wasn't the room's. My fingers closed around it, not because I chose to, but because hands close around what they're given. "Don't," I said, but it came out thin like I was saying it in a play. From behind me, very close, the helpful voice said, "Good." The word hit the back of my neck like breath. I flinched forward. Harold flinched too. He made that same awful sound again, the one that was almost a can't help it. I wrenched my eyes away from him and looked down. I was holding a knife, not the kitchen kind, not a ritual blade from the oddness of the Old Testament. A simple, ugly knife with a black rubber handle and a notch near the hilt where someone had dropped it on concrete once. The blade was clean. The clean was worse. "Give it back," I whispered to no one I could name. "Share," the voice said, and it sounded pleased. From the corner, very soft, like a dog shifting on a rug, came the whisper of hooves or paws. No, not paws, something that used to be paws and wasn't anymore. Chains made a small celebration sound, a tiny jingle like the end of a children's program. I turned, finally, because not turning had become its own kind of obedience. The corner wasn't dark anymore. It wasn't anything anymore. It was a whole cut out of the world. Not black, not a color, an absence. And out of that carved silence leaned a face I knew in a shape I should not have been able to see at all. Zach first, all wrong. The way Ola said, standing wrong, smiling with the wrong part of his mouth, sweat in his beard like dew, eyes bright as coins. Behind him, like a shadow badly attached, the goat's head inclined, not like an animal inclines its head, but like a man listening who has chosen a shape to wear and is curious about how it fits. Zach's gaze dropped to the knife, then to my hand. He lifted his own. For a second, he looked like the porch again, tired, sorry, wanting to be told he was good. His palm turned up. He took a small step forward, like he meant to show me a trick with cards. I couldn't step back. The carpet held me. The room had agreed we would do this, and my consent wasn't required anymore. The helpful voice laughed, lighter than a ringtone. "Be careful," it said, almost sweet. "It's heavy when you try to drop it." I did try. I swear to you I tried. My fingers opened. The knife didn't fall. It stayed where it was like the air had stalled. Then the handle slid a fraction deeper into my grip, like it had found the grooves. It felt like one of those magnets you push together that spin until the poles line up. The voice hummed approval low in its throat. Harold whispered my name. I looked at him helplessly, and he shook his head once, a sharp, tiny movement that said no, not you. The lines around his mouth were blue. He leaned forward enough that I could see the little hairline cracks in his front tooth. I think he would have stood and taken the knife from me. He's a better man. "Don't," I told him again, and this time my voice had some meat on it, some heat. The words steamed in the cold. I looked back at Zach. He lifted his hand higher, and I realized what should have been obvious. The knife would find him whether I wanted it to or not. It would be placed there, and then what would be left of me would live with the memory that my fingers had closed, that my shoulder had jerked forward eagerly, that I had been ready. "No," I said to the room, to the helpful voice, to the corner, to the goat that wasn't really a goat, to my own traitor hand. "No." I turned my wrist. The blade faced me. A quiet move, a small defiance. The helpful voice sighed like a teacher disappointed. The goat's head inclined further, interested. Zach's smile trembled. My hand shook. The knife's tip kissed my own belly through my shirt, and the fabric whispered, and I nearly fainted from the human stupidity of it. It would be so easy. It would end so much of this. If you destroy the vessel, the delivery fails. "Please," I said, and I meant please to God and please to Ruth and please to me 5 years ago who would have done this without thinking, before he got tired. I meant please to the commandment. I meant please to the mat. I meant please to a man smoking on his porch who asked me to tell him he was good. The helpful voice said, cheerful as a radio host, "We can wait." The room exhaled. The floor let my feet go. The blade's point eased off my shirt. Zach flickered, like someone had turned off a fluorescent tube and back on again. The corner side closed a fraction, not a color anymore, not a shape, just a deep piece of ordinary shadow where the paint never dries properly. The chain made one last candy shop noise and went quiet. I dropped the knife. It hit the carpet without a sound, as if the room took even that from it. I staggered back and almost sat in Harold's lap. He caught my elbow. He is very strong when it matters. "We need to go," he said. We did, and we did not run because there was nothing to run from now except ourselves. The hall was still crawling with the chalk word, but in the lobby, the Bible had shut itself. That's what it looked like anyway. The mat lifted and then settled with no one stepping on it. The door was lighter than paper when we pushed it. On the steps, I threw up into the bushes. Harold rubbed my back like I was a child. A car went past, and for a moment I was so jealous of the driver, I wanted to scream at him to pull over and let me climb in and go wherever he was going, even if it was just the supermarket for cling film. I wiped my mouth. My hands smelled like metal and a faint sweet stink, like an animal that sleeps in a shed. "Don't come back," Harold said. This time he made it a rule. I didn't mean, I started. He shook his head again. "I know what you didn't mean," he said. "It doesn't care." He put the keys in my palm and closed my fingers around them. "Keep these," he said. "If it wants you, it will get in anyway, but it's good to pretend locks matter." He left me on the steps because he knows something about dignity I'm still learning. I sat there and the cold went up my coat, sleeves like a tide. I thought about Ruth. I thought about Ola and her rabbit socks. I thought about the word ready written 100 times by hands that were practicing. I thought about how the worst part wasn't the helpful voice or the goat or Zach's all wrong smile. The worst part was how, when the knife sat in my palm, my body remembered what to do faster than my mind did. I walked home the long way. I didn't take my phone out. I didn't look at the sky in case I saw a sign there I couldn't unsee. The houses on our street all had the same cheap front lights, the same little fake security stickers. I went in, locked the door for show, put the keys on the kitchen counter, and washed my hand for so long the skin went shiny. Ruth watched me from the table, hoodie up, lips chapped. "Where were you?" "I can't lie to you," I said, which is a kind of lie. Harold called. "The kids vandalized the church. Chalk." She closed her eyes and breathed through her nose. "And you went." "I went," I said, "and I came back." "That won't always be true," she said. And I sat down across from her and took her hands, and we both pretended our hands weren't shaking. We slept a little as the morning cracked and then healed, sleep that felt like sinking through the ice. When I woke, my phone was on the pillow next to my head. I hadn't put it there. The screen was lit with a draft text I don't remember starting. It said, "I don't want to." There was no contact in the field. I watched the words a long time and then, very slowly, added, "Please." I didn't send it. Who would I send it to? Where does a prayer go when the corner is listening to? I didn't send the text. I put the phone face down like you do a spider under a glass and tell yourself it can't get out if you don't look. I try to make the day normal by doing a violent amount of laundry. I turned the machine on and watched the drum gulp shirts like a mouth chewing. I kept thinking about the shape of my hand. A hand should just be a hand. It shouldn't learn a posture the way a dog learns a trick. Ruth drifted in and out of rooms like she'd lost something she couldn't name. Every time she crossed the doorway, she checked the upper corners the way you check for cobwebs. Only she wasn't looking for cobwebs. I didn't say anything. I made tea and left the mug where her hand would find it. She took a sip and didn't taste it. At noon, Harold texted, "I'm okay." Then another, "Changed the mat." Then, 5 minutes later, "No, I didn't. I thought it, and then I didn't." The start of a spiral. I typed, "You don't have to go back there." He typed, "I do," and then nothing else, which is worse than a paragraph. I tried to work. Open the laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank dock like a metronome, set to the speed of a pulse that's about to be bad news. I typed a sentence and deleted it and typed it again. The house settled around us. The day did that thing grief days do where the light goes brittle and thin and you find yourself counting until dusk like the evening will arrive with answers tucked under its arm. Around 4, Ida called again. "No hello. He's in the garden." "Who?" "Zach," she said. I don't like saying it because she smiles when I do. But he's in the garden and he wants to know if he can come out to play. I looked at Ruth. She watched my face and knew exactly what she was seeing because she shook her head hard enough that her ponytail smacked her cheek. Don't, she mouthed. I'm coming, I told Ida, because I have the worst instincts in the world, because I thought maybe if I took the invitation it would skip our house tonight, because a part of me wanted to see how deep this hole went, because a part of me wanted to know if my no meant anything. Bring a bag, Ida said. A bag. For the mat. She hung up. I told Ruth I'd be 10 minutes. She asked no questions, which is how you know we were already on the other side of sensible. She stood at the window and twisted the hoodie strings until the ends frayed, and I kissed her cheek like a man going to the shop for milk. Ida opened on the first knock, pulled me inside, shut the door fast. Don't go into the back, she said, unless you want to see it, and I don't. I'll just look from the kitchen, I said, which is the sort of lie you tell that comes true. Ola sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing with green felt tip on a cereal box. Her tongue poked out the side of her mouth. She didn't look up. In the garden, through the double glass doors, the late light lay on the grass like paper. At the very end of the small square, where the fence leans, a dark vertical leaned back. At first I took it for the fence post. Then it blinked. Don't open the door, Ida said. I'd already put my fingers on the handle. I won't, I said and meant it. I could hear something through the glass, something like talking through water. One voice steady, low, soothing, the way you talk to a skittish horse. Another high thread under it, like a child answering by moving rather than words. The sound of breath catching before a giggle. A chain clinked once like a teaspoon tapped in a polite kitchen. Can you ask him to go away? Ida asked. I don't think he takes requests, I said, and heard how unhelpful I sounded. I backed away. My heart was beating in my wrists. Ola capped her pen, stood up, and presented me with the cereal box art like it was homework. 2 rectangles, one long, one squat. A stick figure stood between, arms out. The stick figure was made of many lines, overdrawn, several arms drawn over the top of each other like a child started to erase and then forgot. In the corner, she glued a bit of the box's silver lining. It flashed when it caught the light. I didn't want to ask, but everything in me needed to. What's the silver? A mirror, she said, so he could see if I'm doing it right. I think that's very creative, I said, like I was in a Sunday school room and not ankle deep in something else entirely. But maybe today we draw, I cast around. A fruit, an orange. She looked at me with a pity I didn't deserve. He says the orange is yours, she said. That's why you're here, right? I said, and my mouth went tight. Right. Ida walked to the sink, ran the tap, turned it off, ran it again. He made her stand in the corner last night, she said. Not the church corner, the house one. He said houses have corners too. He made her put her hand out, and he touched it with his, and he told her to keep it very still. She was very still. I was the one who shook. I wanted to say, you can leave. You can go to your sister's, to a Premier Inn, to my house. But then my house flashed in my head, the chair under the door handle, the voice that thinks it's being kind, and my tongue stuck to my teeth. We can move rooms, but we're still living in the same plan. I'll talk to him, I lied. I took 2 steps to the door again and stopped because the helpful voice formal as a phone system came from the other side of the glass. Open. No, I said, like an obedient child testing the limits. My hand lifted without permission, pressed my palm to the glass like a man and a lover in a movie. The glass was cold where my hand wasn't, warm where my hand was. The warmth felt shared. My stomach turned. Open, the voice repeated gently, like maybe I hadn't heard properly. Behind the voice, the rustle of something heavy arranged itself. The goat shape shifted. The fence leaned another degree, like the garden was tipping toward the far end. I stepped back. Bring the bag, Ida said again, flat, practical now that she'd spotted the shape of things. She handed me a black bin liner, the cheap kind that rip when you look at them. For the mat, she said, like saying it made it smaller. You want me to steal the church's doormat? You want to carry the other thing? She asked, and I loved her for not dressing the moment up. I don't care what they call it. I want it gone. She was right, and we were idiots, and there was nothing else to do. Okay, I said. I'll take it. I left by the front door. On the pavement, the light looked thin and too bright. The church is 5 minutes from Ida's if you cut the alley. I didn't cut the alley. My bones said open air. I walked the long way and didn't look in shop windows because I didn't want to see my reflection not matching my steps. At the church, a police car idled outside like a bored dog. The 2 officers in it were looking at their phones. I nodded like a man walking past a wedding he wasn't invited to. The door was shut but not locked. I went in with the bag rolled in my fist like a trick I planned on performing badly. The lobby smelled like chalk and something old and damp, like hymn books, like old coats hung in a dark cupboard. The new mat lay obedient and blank and bristly. It looked stupid. I stood over it and couldn't believe this was the plan. Then I believed it. Then I couldn't again. I bent down and my back made a click that reminded me age was happening even when horror is. I lifted the mat. It didn't fight me. I slid it into the bag. The bag split at the seam exactly the way I knew it would, and I laughed once, a short, ugly sound. I got another bag from the kitchen, double wrapped the stupid thing, tied it off like I was about to drop a body in a river. I stuck it under my arm. Need a hand? The helpful voice asked, close enough that I could have bitten it if there had been something to bite. I'm fine, I said, and the word fine sounded like it had been stood up. The police car outside sneezed its siren once as if in sympathy. I left the church with the mat like a thief. The officers didn't stop me. I walked down the steps, feeling like every god I'd ever said please to was watching me leave with the front door welcome in a bin bag. I didn't take it to Ida's. If the mat is a shape, a sketch, a template, then carrying it into a house with a 6-year-old and it felt like bringing her a new workbook. I took it home instead because we were already ruined because some decisions you make because you can still hear your own voice when you make them. Ruth met me at the door, saw the bag, didn't ask. We carried it like a rolled carpet into the shed. The shed smelled like oil and spiders and those old church Christmas decorations we never threw out. The shepherd with a bent staff, the angel whose glitter stuck to your fingers for 3 days. We burn it, Ruth said. Harold tried, I said. We aren't Harold, she said, and the we was a promise and a dare. She fetched a metal brazier from under the tarp. I filled it with the thin sticks I'd been saving for a bonfire I never allowed myself. We set the mat on top like we were making an offering of bad straw. Ruth flicked the lighter. The flame was a little tongue. Nothing caught. We squeezed the trigger down longer. The lighter got hot, and then nothing caught. Ruth swore softly. I found the barbecue firelighters, the petroleum-smelling cubes. We built a small white fort under one corner and lit it in the shed filled with a stink that felt like a headache beginning. The mat blackened at the edge exactly as much as a match should, then stopped. Holy water? I said, not because I believed it would help, but because the sound of the words made me feel like I was doing something other than standing next to a damp basket. We have tap water, Ruth said. She went inside, came back with a washing up bowl. We looked at each other, counted to 3 like we always do when we toss something heavy together. We tipped. The water hit the mat and came straight back up. It wasn't clever. It was physics. I felt stupid. Ruth started laughing, a bark that bent in the middle. We are ridiculous, she said. Yeah, I said, relief making room in me where fear had been clamped. We are. The laugh trailed off. The shed went quiet like a stage when the curtain drops. The helpful voice said, very softly, try again, and the chains sounded like they were a long way away this time, which is worse because it means they can be brought close on purpose. We tried again. I slashed the mat with a Stanley knife. The knife went through and my hand didn't jerk, which felt like a gift. The slash showed nothing inside because it's a mat. Ruth took scissors and hacked like she was cutting through grief. We fed the strips into the brazier, and this time they caught and burned with a dirty smoke that stung the back of the nose like mustard. We stood there until the last strip curled and made a small paper sound, and the brazier glowed like a tired eye. Now what? Ruth said. We watched the embers cool. The air in the shed switched from rancid to metallic. Now we go to Ida's, I said. Without it. Ola was standing in the hall with her rabbit socks when we arrived, as if she'd been listening for our steps. She looked at our empty hands and pouted. He said you'd bring it. We brought ourselves, I said. He can have that. Don't, Ida said from the kitchen, weary. Don't be brave in my house unless you mean it. I meant it, or I thought I did. I burned the mat, I told Ola, and she looked past me, her gaze traveling like a moth testing the air. Her face fell a fraction. Not the disappointed child face. The face you make when someone cancels a plan you didn't want to go to, but had convinced yourself might be okay. He says, all right, she said finally. He says he will use another. What other? Ruth asked, too sharp like she was angry at a child, and then looked like she wanted to take the tone back. Ola answered simply. He says we have lots. We did. Every house has 4. Every room has corners. We had burned one drawing and left 1,000 blank pages. The back door rattled in its frame then, like a cat pushing its forehead against it. Open, the helpful voice called, sing song now, exasperated the way you get when you keep your nice voice on for too long. Open, please. You're ready. We aren't, Ida said. She held on to the worktop with white knuckles. We aren't. Then we'll practice some more, the voice said, as kindly as a receptionist offering you a later appointment. We'll practice until it's easy. The door stilled. The air seemed to thicken like honey does in cold. I realized my hand was out. I yanked it back and put both hands on the table and dug my fingers into the wood until it was a relief that something hurt. Across from me, Ruth had her arms folded tight and the strings of the hoodie were trapped between her teeth. We can leave, I said. Now. We pack bags and go. Where? Ida asked. To a Travelodge corner? To your house corner. It wasn't sarcasm, just tired geometry. We didn't leave. We did something our tiny hearts thought was bolder. We decided to be in the same room together and wait, the way you sit with someone through contractions. We turned the TV on to nothing. We put a cartoon on mute, and the fox winked at us forever. We waited and didn't open and drank tea that turned cold and didn't do anything. Around 10, Ola asked to go to the toilet. Ida stood to go with her. Ola sighed, like she was being made to brush her teeth in front of company. You'll wait there, she told us, instructive, like a girl who's become prematurely acquainted with commands. He says it's polite. We'll wait, I said. She took a long time. Not the worrying long, but the how long can you if you were just sitting on the lid and swinging your legs long. Ida stood in the hall and then came back, stood again, came back. And when she stood a third time, Ruth said, go, and Ida went. Silence. Then Ida's soft voice, coaxing sweetheart. Then her not soft voice. Force bright. Ola, open the door. The sound of a lock turning, but not by a hand. A pause. A small thud, as if a forehead had touched the wood gently. Please. We heard a chain then. Not drag. Lift. The lightest chime. Ruth put her hand flat on the table without meaning to. I stood. I didn't want to go toward that hallway because that's where the corner lives in a house. Good people walk toward sound like that. I'm not a good person, but I had run out of places to hide from that fact. I walked down the hall, and the house got narrower the way houses do at night. The bathroom door was closed. On the door, green felt tip had been used to draw a small rectangle, a mat. Under it, Ola had written ready. The E's were the wrong way round in a child's handwriting that's so honest it hurts. Ola, I said. I'm practicing, she said calm, like we'd interrupted piano. He says to keep my hand up even when it hurts. We'll practice something else, I said. We'll practice opening the door. Not yet, she said. Not yet. Now, Ida said, and her voice did the thing mothers' voices do when they stop being voices and become a kind of lever. The lock turned again. The door opened a crack. All as I looked through, round and dark. Don't be cross, she said. If you're cross, he says I won't be steady. I'm not cross. Ida lied because love makes liars of all of us. Come out. Ola opened the door and stepped into the hall with her hand up, palm flat, like a girl crossing a road with a lollipop stick. Her face had the calm of someone doing a job. In her left palm lay nothing and everything. It lay the shape of a weight she'd been shown. Give him back, I said. He's not yours. She tilted her head, and for a second, I saw something of the goat's gesture in it, a borrowed habit, and I want to slap the air and break it. He says I can't give back what was shared, she said reasonably. You know that. I knew it in the same way you know you will die one day and still find yourself surprised by it when someone you love does. The helpful voice came from the kitchen, 30 feet away, as if it had turned its back and was bored now. Hurry, it said. We have so many to get through. The chain chimed once, impatient. No, I just said, not to the voice but to me. No more church things in my house. And she did the bravest thing anyone did that week. She took Ola's wrist and pressed her daughter's hand down and wrapped her own fingers around it like you wrap rope around a post, small tight circles, and held on. Ola made a small, unhappy noise. Not pain, not fear. Disappointment. Mom, she said, wounded. He says you're being childish. Good, Ida said, and her mouth shook. Good. I'll be as small as it takes. The lights flickered once. Not horror movie flicker. The real world kind, where you make a note to call an electrician. The helpful voice sighed. We'll go next door, it said. We'll use their corner. Distant chain. Distant hooves that weren't. Go. Ida said, furious. Go, but never come back. That's not how it works, the voice said, with a sort of pity in it that made me want to put my fist through plaster. Then it left. Not a leaving you can see. A pressure off. The house exhaled. In the garden, something dark unleaned itself. We stood in the hall a very long minute. Ola blinked like she'd come up from a dive. She looked at her mom's hands wrapped around her wrist and then at me and said, very simply, I'm tired. I know, I just said. Go lie on the sofa. Ola patted away, rabbit feet thudding softly. Ida watched her go like mothers watch first steps. You can't stay, Ida told us without turning. I love you. I'm grateful you can't stay. Whatever you brought, you burn it and you bury the ash, and then you keep burning it until there's nothing left to say yes to. We didn't bring, I started, then shut my mouth because I had literally brought a mat to my house and set it on fire, and that's the kind of sentence you never want to be true of yourself. We're going, Ruth said gently. Call if. I won't, Ida said. She looked at me then, and it wasn't cruel, just accurate. You're a handle. He can turn you. Go be a door somewhere else. We left, and I didn't argue because accuracy doesn't leave you much room. On the pavement, Ruth took my hand. We can't win this, she said. We can only not help. Not help, I repeated, and that felt both like cowardice and like strategy. Sometimes they're the same coat worn inside out. We didn't go home. We walked to the church because apparently our feet are identical to dumb magnets. Police car gone. Lights off. The chalk words still goes to the windows. Ready. Ready for what? For not choosing, that was the trick. Ready for being turned. Ready for letting. We didn't go in. We sat on the steps where the saints and the mess and the teenagers with energy drink cans all sit. Ruth put her head on my shoulder, and I watched our breaths make small clouds that disappeared so quickly it was like they were embarrassed to be seen with us. Tell me honestly, Ruth said after a while. If it happens, if he comes right up and smiles like he did in our room, what do you want me to do? Run, I said. Lock yourself in the bathroom and put every towel at the crack under the door. You know that won't help, she said. I know, I said, but it would help me. She was quiet. Then she said the thing I had been not letting myself think since the first time my hand lifted by itself. If it needs a person, we can go somewhere with no people. The seaside's full of people, I said, like a balloon popping. Not what I meant, she said. Her hand was steady on my knee. I won't. I'm saying out loud what the worst part of your brain already whispered. I'm dragging it into the light so it shrivels. It doesn't shrivel, I said, voice low. It likes the light. It eats the light. We fell quiet again. Streetlight hummed like a mouth on a bottle. Somewhere a fox screamed the fox scream that sounds like a child. We both flinched and then apologized to each other for flinching. The church door opened an inch by itself. Not dramatically. No bang. Just the tiny push of a draft's idea. Then another inch. Then another. The lobby beyond was dark and patient. A smell came out. Well, vinegar coin. The helpful voice didn't say anything because it didn't need to. Show, don't tell. It was giving us the gentlest invitation in the world, the kind you'd accept at a neighbor's barbecue. We didn't stand. We gripped the step like it was the only thing not moving. Ruth whispered no, not to the church but to herself, a reminder. The door kept opening until it was where it would be if a person walked through while holding it with their foot so it wouldn't slam. Then it stopped like a politeness. I almost thanked it for good manners because my brain is full of broken circuits. I stared at the dark. Something in it shifted the way a fish shifts underwater, where you can only see the surface make a shape. A figure broke off and came forward. Not Zach, not the goat. Smaller. A woman. Martha, with the Bible she always left under her chair. She walked to the threshold and stood in the rectangle of the door. Her hands were empty. Her face was turned toward us, but I couldn't see the expression because the light from behind made a halo of her hair. I just want to give this back, she said. What? Ruth asked. Responsibility, Martha said softly. It's yours. My chest went hot. No, I said, and it was the first time I had said it to a person and not a presence. I won't take it. You already are, she said, with no malice. Look at you. I looked. I was sitting on a church step, holding nothing as if it weighed 1,000 things. The shape of my hands was the shape you make when you balance a weight so it won't roll. I stood because sitting wasn't helping. The movement felt like treason. I took one step down. Ruth's hand tightened. We go together or you don't go, she said, and I nodded because she is my wife and I am my wife's. We stood then, not moving, two figures in sheep lantern light, watched by a patient door. The helpful voice finally offered the smallest encouragement. Almost. I pictured the knife without summoning it. I pictured how it would feel when the handle found the grooves in my hand. I pictured the way the room goes thin when it decides for you. I pictured Zach's eyes. I pictured Ruth's hoodie strings trapped in her teeth and how she chews them to stop herself from crying. I pictured Ola's green written ready. I pictured Harold's old strong hands. I can't promise anything, I told Ruth without turning my head. That's the truth. If it's in front of me and the room goes thin. I know, she said. I didn't marry you because you're a promise. I married you because you keep standing at doors with me and saying no until your legs shake. So we said no, not with big words, with the absence of a small yes. We stood there and did nothing and said nothing, and the night wore on and the door didn't mind. It can wait. It misted the air with the idea that all of this could stop if we would do one easy, final, trivial thing. We didn't do it. At some point, the door closed an inch like a shop owner locking up, so teens wouldn't wander in after hours. A fox screamed again and was answered by another. A bus went past. The world kept acting like itself. When we finally walked home, our legs hurt the way they hurt after a funeral, not from distance, but from the angle of your body when you hold yourself around grief. We put the chair under the bedroom handle. We didn't sleep. The voice didn't visit. That's a victory the size of sugar grain, and I will count it. The next morning, Harold didn't text. I went to his house because that's what you do when the absence hums. His curtains were half shut. The plant on the sill was doing fine because plants will outlive us. I knocked. His neighbor across the way stuck her head out and said he went early, like Harold had decided to take an old man constitutional. He hadn't. I drove to the church. The lobby was lit. The mat I had burned lay there new and bristly and exactly the same. You could laugh at it. I didn't. I put my foot on it and felt nothing except the knowing that nothing is not the same as safe. In the hall, the chalk writing had been scrubbed to pale ghosts. In front of the piano, an old man's cardigan lay folded a little too neatly. A Bible sat open to the page with the valley. I said his name. The room did not echo it back. Share, the helpful voice said from wherever it waits when it's not pretending to be air. No, I said, and the word cost me a day of my life, I think. I'm writing instead. That's what this is. A refusal written down so I can hold it between my fingers when my hand tries to remember its trick. A record so I can show myself what I said no to when the night comes with its very reasonable request. A warning in case you find yourself standing in a hallway handout, polite. A prayer disguised as a confession, because maybe prayers have a better chance if they look like something else walking across a border. I know how this sounds. Like I've given up. I haven't. I get up in the morning, I make a list, I put silly normal things on it like Hoover stairs and buy salt because movement puts sawdust over the blood. I go to Ida's sometimes and sit on the edge of the sofa and talk to Ola about foxes and frogs and once because she wanted about the worst bits in Judges, and we agree they're awful, and she eats a biscuit like a small animal working at a nut. I pick up Harold's Bible once a week and put it somewhere else, and then put it back. I stand on church steps in the evening with Ruth and watch the door not open. Sometimes the voice comes and breathes kindly through the crack and says, "Think how simple this would be." And I say no, and my body says no, and we get to keep that night. Sometimes it doesn't come, and we get to pretend it moved on. That's a lie, but it's my favorite. If I ever break the fifth commandment, it won't be because I decided to become a man who breaks commandments. It'll be because a room got thin around me and my muscles remembered a lesson a stranger taught my hand, and because love is easy to weaponize when you tell it's helping. I am telling you this because I want someone to hold that if my hand ever closes, I try to spend enough no's in advance to slow it by a second. Maybe a second is the difference between a clean blade and one that glances off a belt buckle. Maybe a second is the breath in which a helpful voice loses patience. Maybe a second is when a chain catches around its own horn and snags. If you pray, say my name once in the kind of voice you use when you talk to walls you want to hold. Say Ruth's. Say Ida's. Say Ola's in a loud voice the corner will hear and hate. Pray that we keep choosing the stupid, boring no. Pray that we stay childish. Pray that if we learn any new shapes, they're the shapes of things that are put down. I'm writing this now because the house is quiet and the chair hasn't moved and the foxes are tired of singing and the night is pretending it's just weather. I'm writing it because my left palm has stopped tingling for the first time in a week. I'm writing it because the helpful voice hasn't practiced on me today, and that alone feels like a miracle I shouldn't say out loud in case it hears and wants to correct me. And I'm writing it because I hear the steps on the stairs. The first one is heavy. The second is quick. The third is soft. The fourth is the sound of chain making its mind up. The fifth is the sound of someone who used to go to our church and still does in the only way that counts. The sixth is the sound a mat makes when you stand on it and there's nothing after it but door. The seventh is the sound of a breath drawn to speak my name in a tone so gentle I hate it. I put the pen down. I put my hand flat on the table so it has a job that isn't waiting. I say no out loud, quiet once. I say it again. I say it until it's just a shape with no meaning. That's okay. Shapes unattended lose their teeth. The footsteps pause at the landing. Ruth's fingers find my wrist and hold there. The helpful voice feels for the crack in the door and decides whether to try it this time or not. It's patient. I'm not. I want to sleep. I want to wake up in a house where chairs are chairs and corners are where dust lives and the words in a book refuse to become weapons in my hands. I want the mat to be straw and nothing else. I want the goat to go back to being a bad symbol on teenagers' hoodies. I want to stop wanting. If you read this, be childish for me. Be embarrassing. Refuse dramatically. Make a scene where one isn't required. Hold a wrist, even if it makes you look silly. Burn things that are only things because someone told them they were more. Be the person at the barbecue who says, no, thanks, to a second burger and knows hunger will come back around asking. When the voice asks you to open, make it ask twice. When it tells you it's easier to be ready, tell it you're busy being clumsy. I'm going to turn the page now. That's all I can promise. Another page.